Maybe if you made more money, you'd understand what a real career looks like. My wife mocked me every time she canceled our date nights for work. Then her boss called me out of the blue and asked the one question that made my stomach drop. Is everything okay? She hasn't been here in 2 weeks. The first time my wife canceled date night because of work, I understood. The 10th time, I was disappointed. By the 30th time, I realized work wasn't the real problem. I just didn't know what was. My name is Jason Miller. I'm 37 years old. And until last year, I thought my marriage was surviving a rough patch. Turns out it had already been dead for months. My wife, Rebecca, and I had been together for 11 years. Married for 8. No kids. I owned a custom furniture business that my father and I started in our garage when I was 23. Rebecca worked as a senior marketing manager for a luxury cosmetics company. At least, that's where I thought she worked. In the beginning, we were a team. When my business struggled, she supported me. When she got promoted, I celebrated harder than she did. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Then, about a year before everything fell apart, Rebecca changed. It started with little comments. You still make furniture by hand? That's kind of old-fashioned. I laughed. People pay more for handmade. Sure. Then she'd compare me to her co-workers' husbands. Sarah's husband just bought a Tesla. Melissa's husband made partner at his law firm. My boss is younger than you and already owns 2 vacation homes. Every conversation somehow became a comparison. Nothing I did seemed impressive anymore. One Friday evening, I surprised her with reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. She walked through the front door, saw me dressed nicely, and sighed. What? I forgot. Forgot what? I have to work. I stared at her. Again. It's important. You said that last week. And the week before. She rolled her eyes. Then came the line I'd hear over and over again. Maybe if you made more money, you'd understand what a real career looks like. That one hurt. Not because I was broke. My business generated a healthy income. The mortgage was paid. Neither of us worried about bills. But Rebecca had become obsessed with status. If a job didn't come with a corporate title, she looked down on it. I tried ignoring it. Marriage requires patience. At least that's what I told myself. Meanwhile, her schedule became stranger. She was constantly traveling for work. Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, Seattle. Sometimes she'd leave for 3 days. Sometimes 5. Whenever I asked details, she'd become defensive. You don't trust me? Of course I do. Then stop interrogating me. So I stopped asking. That was my mistake. About 6 months later, I noticed something odd. Rebecca no longer talked about coworkers. Not one. No office stories. No annoying meetings. No workplace gossip. Nothing. For someone supposedly working 80-hour weeks, she rarely mentioned work at all. One night, I casually asked how her boss was doing. She froze for half a second, then smiled. Busy. What was his name again? Another pause. Why? I forgot. She laughed awkwardly. That's weird. Then immediately changed the subject. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Looking back, that moment should have set off alarms. Then came our anniversary. 11 years together. I planned everything. Dinner. Hotel. A weekend away. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, she canceled. Again. Emergency work trip. I didn't even argue anymore. Okay. That seemed to surprise her. No fight. What's the point? She looked relieved. That should have broken my heart. Instead, it made me suspicious. For the first time in our marriage, I stopped believing her. A week later, I was sanding a dining table in my workshop when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello. A man's voice answered. Jason. Yes. This is Richard Collins. The name meant nothing to me. Sorry, who? I'm Rebecca's boss. Immediately, my stomach tightened. Oh, there was a pause. Then he asked a question that changed everything. A question so strange that for a second I thought I'd misheard him. Is everything okay? What do you mean? Another pause. Then he said, "Rebecca hasn't been here in 2 weeks." The sander slipped from my hand and crashed onto the workshop floor. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. 2 weeks? Yes. Richard sounded confused. She said she was taking personal leave because of a family emergency. Family emergency? My heart started pounding. No. What? There isn't a family emergency. Silence. A long silence. Then Richard quietly asked, "If she's not with family?" Neither of us finished the sentence. We didn't have to, because suddenly, for the first time in months, every canceled date night, every fake business trip, every late-night excuse, every strange conversation, every missing weekend, started fitting together. And deep down, I already knew I wasn't going to like where the pieces led. For almost a minute, neither Richard nor I said anything. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Jason, I probably shouldn't be calling you. I appreciate that you did. I only called because payroll flagged her absence. We thought maybe something serious had happened." I swallowed hard. It has. We ended the call, and I just stood there in my workshop staring at the half-finished dining table. Everything suddenly made sense. The conference in Chicago, the client dinner in Miami, the anniversary she canceled. None of it had been work. For the first time in months, I stopped wondering if I was overthinking. I wasn't. I was being lied to. But instead of confronting Rebecca, I did something she'd never expected. I stayed quiet. That afternoon, I called an attorney. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. I didn't tell a single friend. I didn't tell my parents. I simply waited for facts. It took the investigator 5 days. 5 days to destroy 11 years of marriage. Rebecca hadn't been traveling for work. She'd been renting the same luxury apartment downtown under a 6-month lease. And she wasn't alone. She'd been living there with a man named Brandon, a fitness influencer she'd met at a networking event almost a year earlier. According to the investigator, most of Rebecca's business trips had actually been weekends with him. The biggest surprise wasn't the affair. It was Brandon himself. He wasn't rich. He wasn't successful. He rented sports cars for social media videos. Designer clothes were borrowed from sponsors. Half the luxury lifestyle on his Instagram wasn't his. The man Rebecca mocked me for wasn't even financially stable. Then the investigator handed me something else. A folder containing emails. Rebecca hadn't been traveling because of work. She'd actually been fired almost 3 weeks earlier for falsifying expense reports. She'd submitted fake hotel receipts and fake client dinners to reimburse vacations she'd taken with Brandon. When the company audited her expenses, they terminated her immediately. Instead of telling me, she pretended she was still employed. Every morning she'd leave the house in business clothes, drive to Brandon's apartment, then come home pretending she'd spent another exhausting day at the office. The woman who mocked my career didn't even have one anymore. My attorney looked at the evidence. Don't confront her. Why? Because she's still lying. So, people who lie this comfortably usually have another plan. He was right. 3 days later, I accidentally found that plan. Rebecca had left her tablet on the kitchen counter. A message popped onto the screen. From Brandon. Did he finally invest the money? Invest? I opened the conversation. Rebecca had been trying for weeks to convince me to put nearly every dollar of my business savings into what she called a can't-miss luxury wellness startup. She claimed one of her executives had offered us an exclusive opportunity. There was no startup. Brandon wanted the money. One message made me physically sick. Once he transfers it, file for divorce. He'll never recover financially. Rebecca replied. He's almost convinced. I quietly locked the screen, then smiled, because for the first time, I wasn't the one walking into a trap. She was. I told Rebecca I'd decided to make the investment. Her face lit up. Really? I've been thinking. I knew you'd come around. I just need 1 week to move the money. She hugged me. I knew you'd finally trust me. That entire week, she acted like the perfect wife. Cooked dinner, suggested movie nights, even planned a date. It was almost impressive. The night before the investment, I moved every dollar from our joint accounts into new accounts my attorney had already established under the legal protections he recommended. Every transfer was completely lawful. Every document was prepared. Then, instead of wiring money to the fake investment, I filed for divorce. Rebecca was served the papers the following afternoon. She stormed into my workshop holding the envelope. "What is this? A divorce? You can't be serious." "I am. You don't even know what you're talking about." I calmly slid another envelope across the workbench. She opened it. Inside were copies of the investigator's report. Photos, apartment lease, expense fraud, termination letter, hotel records. Her hands started shaking. "You followed me?" "No. I can explain. So can your former employer." Her face turned white. "You know about that?" "I know everything." For the first time in months, she had nothing to say. Then she tried crying. "I'm sorry. No. I made a mistake." "You made hundreds." She stepped closer. "I'll leave him." "I know." She froze. "How?" "Because he already left you." She looked confused. "What?" "You should probably check his Instagram." While Rebecca had been lying to me, Brandon had found someone else with even more followers and more money. He'd moved out of the apartment 2 days earlier. She'd lost him before she'd even lost me. She collapsed into a chair. "I have nowhere to go." I nodded toward the front door. "I noticed." She whispered, "Please don't do this." I looked at the woman who had spent a year making me feel like my work wasn't good enough. Then I said the only thing I wanted her to remember. "Do you remember what you used to tell me every time you canceled date night?" Tears rolled down her face. She already knew. I repeated it anyway. "Maybe if you made more money, you'd understand what a real career looks like." I smiled. "Turns out a real career is one where your boss actually knows you're at work." She covered her face and started crying. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt free. The divorce took 4 months. Because Rebecca had hidden the loss of her job, attempted to persuade me to transfer marital funds into a fraudulent investment, and lied repeatedly during financial disclosures, the judge ruled heavily against her credibility. She didn't get my business. She didn't get the savings she'd been planning to take. She left with exactly what the law entitled her to and nothing more. 8 months later, I finished the dining table I'd been sanding the day Richard called. Instead of selling it, I donated it to a local community center. A small brass plaque underneath reads, "Built by someone whose career was never the problem." A few weeks after that, Richard, the same boss who'd accidentally exposed the truth, called again. "Remember when Rebecca said handmade furniture wasn't a real career?" I laughed. "Unfortunately, our executive board saw the conference table you built for the community center. So, we'd like you to build one for our new headquarters." It was the biggest custom order my company had ever received. Not because my wife left. Not because I wanted revenge. Because someone else recognized the value she'd spent years trying to convince me didn't exist. Rebecca thought success was measured by business cards, job titles, and expensive dinners. I learned something different. A career isn't defined by the building you walk into every morning. It's defined by the honesty you bring home every night. And that's something she never understood until she had neither.